Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you.
So, good morning to all of you once again. And today is one of the important sections, blocks of this course that we're going to discuss. It's about valuation and pricing of natural resources. And because this is a long and intensive area where you all need to understand the concepts, I'll try to largely focus on Unit 1, that is on ecosystem services and its valuation. Now, the outline of today's presentation will cover ecosystems, ecosystem goods and services, reasons to value ecosystem goods and services, and what are the important valuation approaches that are available for ecosystem economics, their definitions, key examples, what are the main advantages, and also some of the limitations, what we call as disadvantages of doing valuation of ecosystem services. Now we understand that if we talk about sustainable development, social, economical, and environmental aspects are three important areas of sustainable development. And today we are going to cover the economic aspects. That's very important because unless and until there is economics and economy is not ensured, we cannot achieve sustainable development in future or in present. This is something that's uh, already in my previous slides and previous presentation, as well as other speakers might have elaborated and talked in detail about ecosystems. Just very briefly, ecosystems are dynamic complexes of both biotic and abiotic components. When I say biotic components, they are basically plant, animals, and all the microorganisms that are present, and abiotic components like minerals, nutrients, soil, moisture, the microclimatic parameters, the weather-related parameters. So when they interact with each other, with the habitat, so this interaction as a functional unit is called as ecosystem. So ecosystems can be at a micro level, they can be at a larger landscape level, and very large ecosystem level. So for example, forest ecosystem, mountain ecosystem, agriculture ecosystem, river ecosystem, wetland ecosystem, marine ecosystem. We have diverse ecosystems in our planet. Now, it's very important to note that this definition, as I mentioned, is very independent of the spatial scale that we are going to work on. So it can be a micro scale. For a microorganism, the niche is very small. But when you talk about the larger animals and mammals, the spatial scale are very broad. And these ecosystems are very well interconnected to each other, and they are also overlapping in nature. For example, if you see a terrestrial ecosystem and an aquatic ecosystem, they are interconnected somewhere, and they are also overlapping. And so for our study of economics of ecosystems, it's very important for us to understand at what scale we are doing and applying these ecosystem economics approaches. Now, when we understand about ecosystems, it's also important to understand ecosystem assets, because these assets are what we are going to value in our economics. So when I talked about spatial characteristics in my previous slides of ecosystem, we understand they are very fundamental part of our analysis. So these can be measured in two ways. One thing is stock and changes in stock. For example, if there is a carbon stock in a forest area, the biomass and the growth, and there can be will be certain productivity in a year's time when the tree grows and the carbon stock changes marginally. So there are two important perspectives we need to keep in mind when we are talking about ecosystem assets. First is ecosystem condition. What is the condition of ecosystem and the extent of ecosystem? What is the larger extent of ecosystem? So these are the operational characteristics of ecosystem. So that includes the structure, the composition, the process, the functions. So structure, we have food web, we have food chain, the smaller organisms, the herbivores, the producers, and later this food web that is more complex in nature and has a lot many food chains. They design and they decide the structure of this food web. Then, as I mentioned, there are biotic and abiotic components. They also decide the operational characteristics of how ecosystem will function over the time period. Then processes, there is photosynthesis, then we have respiration, evapotranspiration, transpiration loss. These all are part of ecosystem processes. And what are the major important functions? So you know that there are a lot of ecosystem services that we have also discussed, and many other lecturers have also covered functions of ecosystem. So these are a lot of biogeochemical cycles that are being regulated. Then there are a lot of supporting benefits, soil conservation, then reducing disaster risk, and also a lot of cultural benefits. So largely, the ecosystem assets are resilience towards a lot of extreme climate events or climate change. So these are the functions of healthy ecosystem assets. Now, this is in contrast with individual resources. When we talk about ecosystem assets, are part of this entire system, and they are different than what individual resources bring to us. Ecosystem services, back and forth, you might have been discussing in so many presentations and discussions, are the contributions of ecosystem for human well-being. So these are a lot of these ecosystem services, and these are called as contributions because they are economic, and they provide a lot of economical benefits and infrastructural benefits also to human well-being. So there are provisioning ecosystem services, regulating ecosystem services, cultural ecosystem services, habitat quality, and habitat support. And these are ecosystem services, support ecosystem processes, are also natural capital, provide a lot of tangible and intangible benefits to the communities, and largely that ensures human well-being. Now, now it is important to keep in mind that not all flows from the environment are environment ecosystem services. This excludes the extracted minerals, and presence of human beneficiaries is necessary part of this ecosystem process and supply. This is an important depiction of what was called as ecosystem services by Millennium Ecosystem Assessment 2005. And those who have gone through it, I'm sure a lot of you might have be aware about it, where there are four important ecosystem services: provisioning, where you get food, fodder, fresh water, fuel, fresh water, and then you have regulating ecosystems. So your provisioning services are basically direct use values. Your regulating services are indirect use values. These are climate regulation by improving the microclimate, flood regulation, disease regulation, water purification. These are all indirect use values of good and healthy ecosystem. And they also provide a lot of spiritual, educational, recreational, and aesthetic benefits. So these cultural ecosystem services can also be, discussed as place-based attachment or nature connectedness or psychological benefits of nature and natural benefits. And then overall supporting ecosystem services. So ecosystem services where services are supporting, provisioning, regulating, and cultural benefits are called as supporting services. So under this, there are diverse biogeochemical cycles: the nitrogen cycle, the water cycle, the phosphorus cycle, the carbon cycle, and how they promote soil formation, how they support primary production. This all is part of this entire process. And this all decides life on Earth, and ensures human well being as well. Now, the concept of ecosystem based services that was given uh, by Millennium Ecosystem Assessment and also some of the previous economist in this field. This was in 2015 replaced by Ibis concept of nature's contribution to people. Now, this is the depiction and this is the diagrammatic representation of nature's contribution to people. And there are six interlinked important components, and these are more socio-ecological in nature, whereas the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment and ecosystem services are more ecological in nature. So this new concept, nature's contribution to people, that's more socio-ecological system in place, and it works on different scales on a different spatio-temporal approach, is constituted of six important elements. One is nature as whole, then second is nature's benefit to people, And then third is anthropogenic and assets. So these anthropogenic assets are direct drivers and indirect drivers. And then fourth one is institution and governance systems, because these institutions and governance systems are indirect drivers of change, but at the same time can reduce and amplify the benefits that community gets from ecosystems. Then direct drivers of change are climate change, land use, invasive species, and so on and so forth. And they all, if working in a harmonious manner, living in harmony with nature, can provide good quality of life. So this good quality of life is only possible if we live in harmony with nature, live in balance with nature, live in harmony with mother nature. So there are different depiction of achieving good quality of life, and these trends, they change over time. They are spatio-temporal in nature, and the scope is right from global to local. So this is what IBIS, Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, provided. And good thing about this is that these conceptual framework given by Diaz and IBIS in 2015 has been taken as a base approach for all the Intergovernmental Panel on Ecosystem Services uh, assessments, be it regional assessment, global assessment, pollinator assessment, modeling the scenarios, and also the upcoming assessment like sustainable use of wild species, food, energy, water nexus, and so on and so forth. Now, there is an interdisciplinary approach in when you talk about ecosystem valuation, and the conceptual model of ecosystem accounting is basically drawn from ecology, the very basic fundamental understanding of the principles of ecology, understanding the basics of economy, understanding the national accounting system, and statistical measurement. So, if you see, these are interlinked and they also go beyond the national boundaries. So they are transboundary in nature, there are transboundary environmental flows. So both the benefits and the losses both can affect this ecosystem, economics and evaluation of ecosystem services and their valuation. Now, if you talk about uh, who are there in field in terms of valuing ecosystem services, so there are a lot of international organizations like TEEB, the biodiversity, the ecology, the ecosystem economics, ecosystem and biodiversity economics, the TEEB approach. Then you have a lot of scientists, even in India, Professor Ninan and Professor Madhu Verma, and then so many other scientists and economists are involved in ecosystem services. Now, it's very important to understand that why we need to value. We know that nobody can put a value on nature, but still there are a lot of valuation exercise done. And there are a lot of valuation studies being carried out, and this is one of the interesting areas of ecology that has been explored in last few decades and has been in a very much interest in present as well. So the first important thing is to understand how much an ecosystem contributes to economic activity or society. It's important, and that's why the natural capital approach has come very much in discussions. We need to understand how much ecosystem contributes to economical activities or GDP. The green GDP discussion has been also in the important discussions right now, because a country develops because of its resources, forest resources, good wetlands, good mountain, healthy mountain ecosystem, because they ensure a lot of supplies that are required for the development of the country. Now, it's important also to understand that the benefit and cost of any intervention that affects the ecosystem. For example, a hydropower project in Himalayas or a river valley project somewhere in the central of the country, a kind of regulation or incentive, they can make goods and services comparable with other investments. For example, if there are good interventions, they ensure better growth. But at the same time, if we degrade our ecosystem services, our ecosystems and biodiversity, they also affect how development takes place in the country. For example, I'll take the example of the recent COVID-19. While COVID-19 has been considered a zoonotic disease, a disbenefit of the nature, but at the same time, because it came from the nature and there has been a lot of theories how it came, it has been considered a major limitation for the development of the country. And many countries across the world have been affected because we have been not been able to ensure that this zoonotic spread doesn't take place, or it doesn't spread in the way it has spread, and it has affected a lot of economic activities, the GDPs of some of the powerful nations of the world. And then it's also important to understand that how cost and benefits of change in ecosystem are distributed. So for that purpose also, we need to value ecosystem and also to make conservation financially sustainable. That has been another area where valuation has been explored and become very important for these kind of discussion. Now, in this context, it is important to understand that payment of ecosystem services has been a very great approach and has been tried in many countries where communities who are marginalized but living in some of the high value ecosystems are given incentives to conserve. So these financial incentives can help sustain these services for a very longer time. Now, before we go into the discussion, I want you to learn some of these important terminologies that are very relevant if some of you are interested to explore ecosystem services and ecosystem valuation approach in future. Now, one of the important terminology that you might be hearing a lot if you are aware and you are exposed towards these kinds of discussions where environmental externalities are discussed. Now, environmental externalities is an important terminology in economics, and it is basically a effect that is associated with production or consumption that extends to a third party. For example, here I am sharing example of or buying a car. Now it eases my way of driving to work, and it also eases a lot of, and it gives me a lot of luxury while I reach to my workplace. At the same time, the personal costs are included. So these personal costs are buying a car one time, and then every month or every week what I spend in terms of fuel, buying fuel from local petrol pump or somewhere else. Now the positive externalities are nothing. You don't get anything positive. The only positive thing that you get is the luxury and avoiding the rush in public transport system. But that's more of a personal benefit. But if you talk about the externalities, the third party cost to the third party, it's more negative in terms of externalities because the third party is getting pollution. There are also risk of accidents, and a lot of car on the road means a lot of congestion on the road. So that reduces the ease of traveling of third party who are on the road. So now this is an external externality and a negative externality. And then there are positive externalities. For example, I start walking to my workplace. So now it reduces congestion because there is not one more car on the road. At the same time, it benefits third party because it reduces pollution, it reduces the risk of accident, and of course, congestion. So understanding environmental externalities is very important. For example, if there is a hydropower project, this can benefit a larger population because we get a lot of electricity out of it. But at the same time, there are negative externalities that are linked to it. And these negative externalities are linked for people of these areas where the forest loss is happening. So they are not getting enough of provisioning benefit. And at the same time, there are also risk and hazard. They can be disastrous because of a hydropower project. So this is an important concept that I wanted for you to be shared with all of you. And then it is also important to understand that there is a concept of market failure, lack of protection of ecosystem services via market or regulation. So we all know that a true price for any ecosystem services cannot be placed. We can never assess the true value of ecosystem service. And this cannot be captured in free markets. We cannot compare it with something that is available in market and sold in market. For example, if I give you this experience of photosynthesis, a plant fixing carbon dioxide in the presence of sunlight and making carbohydrates and different kind of sugars for the plant. Now, this is, I mean, if you want to actually fix carbon and make something else and do carbon sequestration in lab-based condition, this is a multi-million dollar industry. So the kind of benefit that plants are providing you by easily fixing the carbon that is available in the environment and reducing the pollution load is cannot be measured in anything that is available in the market. And then institutional failure. If our policies are not able to encourage including and mainstream ecosystem benefits in policy planning, and if your ecological boundaries don't match political boundaries, so this kind of institutional failure where they're not efficiently and sufficiently capturing the value of these ecosystems, so this also leads to ecosystem failure. So market failure is very important to be understand when you want to go for ecosystem analysis. Now, ecosystem accounting is also important. For example, if you are having a healthy ecosystem and suddenly you see a nearby ecosystem gets degraded, so you can actually compare the values, compare the ecosystem benefits, and what are the value out of it. So this can ensure some kind of conservation, prioritizing where the conservation efforts should be and how these conservation efforts should be taken care of. Now, second important area is information for linking those changes to human activities and human well-being. So once you understand there is a degradation happening, and you also know that this decline ecosystem benefits, and what is the value of this decline, that degradation, the damage, it can help the human activities to reduce this kind of impact, and at the same time identify effective policies and framework that can reduce these kind of degradation and also prioritize conservation in these areas. So that's the benefit of ecosystem accounting. And the scope of analysis is not limited to ecosystem, because the larger scope of ecosystem accounting is basically the society, because ecosystem and economics is for societies. So the larger benefit comes to the society. And of course, they talk about the trade-offs, the co-benefits involved. So when I say trade-off, it's like if you are having reducing these kind of forest areas in certain areas, so what kind of trade-offs you are going, how you are trying to balance it out. So reduction of ecosystem services, degradation of ecosystem because of a certain activity, how you are trying to balance, maybe having a good plantation, or how these industries do when they divert forest to not for a non-forested purpose, they try to have a certain kind of compensatory afforestation. So this is a kind of a trade-off, but it's not a very successful trade-off to actually restore the kind of forest they have degraded. Now, there are different spatial units of doing ecosystem accounting. Statistical unit of ecosystem are differentiated based on the spatial areas. So the smallest area, you can assume this ecosystem accounting unit as a grid system. So the smallest grid is known as basic spatial unit, BSU. Then you have a land cover ecosystem functional unit. So again, there can be a different grids joining and making these different land cover ecosystem functional units. So this can be provisional classification that is provided by ecosystem economics accounting. And then there are the larger ecosystem accounting unit based on purpose of analysis. So based on purpose of analysis, you can take the entire bigger grid, and inside the grid, you can differentiate based on different ecosystem functional units. So different ecosystem functional units can be a forest area, agriculture area, a wetland, desert or marine area, whatever is present in that larger ecosystem unit. And then the smallest grid of this ecosystem accounting is called as basic spatial unit. Now, like any subject and like any other ecosystem, economics and accounting approach, there are values and limitations of economic valuation. As I mentioned, true value of any ecosystem, any biodiversity cannot be given. So you can give a representative value that changes the way market changes. For example, if you give the ecosystem valuation of an ecosystem sometime in 1850s or 1950s, it will be very different than the kind of value of that ecosystem is present on in present time. So this all is based on what is the value of dollar, what is the value of pound in present time. So according to that, the entire valuation exercise also gets changed. So this valuation is based on the market, what are the market prices, and comparing the ecosystem with the market prices available of certain goods and services. Now, economic evaluation highlights the cost and benefit, but at the same time, in past, this all has been ignored. It provides a sets of tools, as I mentioned, for better and informed evidence-based decision making. And that's not a standalone exercise that you do something and leave it. It should be for the betterment of well-being and ensuring that better governance and policy approaches are taken care of by these valuation exercise. And then there are case studies that have underestimated ecosystem services at larger scale. But at the same time, it is also important to mention that at a larger scale, it is very difficult to replace ecosystem goods and services and interactions, because these interactions are too complex to come up with a more appropriate value of these larger ecosystem is very tough. So whenever we do this exercise at a smaller scale, we get more clearer, cost and more appropriate cost of ecosystem values and services. But as we go in the larger scale, as I mentioned in the ecosystem accounting unit, it becomes really tough to compare different ecosystems and come up with a more appropriate cost. Then the third important area, another important area is there are many ecosystems that can never be measured and quantified because we don't have enough scientific, technological, and economic data. For example, a lot of marine ecosystems, a lot of grassland ecosystems, if we have not done enough of ecological exercises, ecological surveys, it becomes really tough for these ecosystems to be appropriately measured and quantified. So there are more studies on certain areas, but limited studies for some other ecosystems. Now, there is again a few more applicability and advantages and limitations. Uh, there are a lot of studies that are now coming on valuing the cultural ecosystem services, the recreational, the spiritual, the aesthetic, the psychological benefits. But again, it's very tough to quantify psychological benefits and nature connectedness because it's a representative value. You can never assign a true value. So this becomes a tough decision. And then payment of ecosystem services, again, a very representative value. We can never assign a actual value of how much communities should be paid in terms of taxes to conserve these resources, because larger benefits are always harnessed by communities living in downstream areas. For example, in Indo-Gangetic belt, the benefits of having Ganges and the benefits of having fertile soil is not appropriately assessed, and not communities living in forest areas or living in mountains in Himalayas are assigned true values, are given taxes to benefit their livelihood and other ecosystem support system for subsistence lifestyle that they need. Now, uh, the results of economic valuation are also not definite, and as I mentioned, they are more representative values, they are perception based values. Hence, once you do a study in certain area, you cannot transfer that value and approach to some other area. So this is one of the bigger limitation. And then even if you have done a lot of good economic valuation of a certain watershed, you have decided a payment for ecosystem services for communities living in upstream areas, it doesn't mean that it will lead to wise use of and management of ecosystem and these services. So there is no guarantee that valuation approach will lead to a better decision making, better policy making, a better framework for conservation and protection of these resources. And there are many studies where it has also been mentioned that payment of ecosystem services and economic evaluation are basically a double-edged sword, because we can never assess the true value of these ecosystems and the benefits for conservation and protection of these resources. But at the same time, if you see the global development and how countries are moving towards more economic valuation, even in India, there are a lot of valuation. There are certain economists like Madhu Verma. She has done ecosystem evaluation for entire Uttarakhand state, for the entire Himachal Pradesh, and she has also tried to do ecosystem evaluation for all the tiger conservation areas, tiger reserves in the country, to ensure that there is more protection going to these tiger, and this can also be mainstreamed in policy planning. So there are already a lot of case studies, and a lot of countries are actually mainstreaming these policies, these valuation approaches in the policy planning. For example, China is using a lot of various compensation programs. And even if you see in India, the Manrega, the Mahatma Gandhi Rural Employment Guarantee scheme is one of the the biggest payment of ecosystem services in the world. Then Vietnam and Japan, they are also using accounting and valuation in their NBSAPs, the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. So if you see globally, there is a lot of development happening, and also a lot of mainstreaming of values in policy planning. Now, when I talk about valuation approaches, there are different approaches. For example, resource rent, the provisioning benefits, the fish we harvest, and you can compare it. For example, many of you who have their lands, agricultural lands in their villages, and many of your families are not living in these villages. So you ask some of the people who are already living there, and you ask them to give some of this rent of land to you, and also some half of the share or one fourth of the share of what they grow. So this is a similar approach of assessing provisioning ecosystem services that I will be talking about, the willingness to pay and willingness to accept approach. And my previous studies with using this methodology for assessing provisioning ecosystem services says that communities think that ecosystems and the resources inside these ecosystems are their own because they have been their custodians for millennia. So what they consider it more as a willingness to accept than willingness to pay, because they think because these are their resources they have conserved, so they will not pay. Instead, they should be given amount to actually accept to rent out these provisioning services to assess the value of ecosystem services. So somebody who is interested to understand direct use values, the flow of ecosystem services, especially the food, fodder, litter, uh, then NTFPs, they can assess using this methodology. Then there are markets established for regulating services. For example, carbon stock has a good voluntary market in US and many other countries. And if you have good healthy carbon stock in your forest areas, you can actually sell based on 1 ton carbon is one carbon credit in voluntary markets. And has been a very good approach for giving incentives to the community under reduced emission from deforestation and degradation plus the red plus approach. Then reveal preference methods, use values, production function approaches, averting the behavior of the people, replacement costs, travel costs, and hedonic prices that I will be discussing in my forthcoming slides. And then the stated preference methods towards use and non-use values, contingent valuation for use approaches, and choice experiments for non-use values. Now, this is the overall conceptual framework and how it looks like for total economic value concept for ecosystem. So if we have to calculate the total economic value, the first important thing to understand is that ecosystem has use values and ecosystem also had non-use values. So the use values are direct use values. For example, uh, we have a lot of, especially the communities that are living inside these forest areas or close to these healthy ecosystem, they forage a lot of NTFPs, wild edibles, litter, fodder for their animals, fuel wood. So this comes under the direct use values, and there are indirect use values that even fresh water is also direct use values, and indirect values are different. For example, the carbon stocks and the good climate and soil fertility and the ambient air, good air, fresh air. So these are indirect use values. And in non-use values, there are existence values and bequest values. Again, I'll be elaborating it in my forthcoming slide. And between these use values and non-use values are optional values or option values. Now, as I mentioned, there are two important terms, use values and non-use values. So the direct use values are direct, indirect, and option values that are segregated into three parts. So the direct use values are all the direct benefits from the provisioning benefits from the ecosystem, and indirect are all like water flows, climate regulation, good soil, reducing the soil loss, flood control, nutrient retention. These are all indirect use values that lead to better direct use values. And then are the option values. A premium is placed on maintaining the resources and landscapes for future possible direct and indirect use value, and some of which may not be known now. So these are the option values, and these are calculated to understand if we want to keep these resources functioning in a healthy way in the future, how much should be the value. So this all is calculated and assessed under the use values. And the non-use values are basically existence value, the intrinsic value of resources and landscape, irrespective of its use as a cultural, aesthetic, and bequest significance. So the bequest value is the future value that we want to leave for our forthcoming generations. Now, if I want to elaborate more on bequest value, so you can see bequest value was the non-use value, but at the same time a very important value. And you will maybe this terminology will again come when you do some kind of more reading of economic evaluation. So the bequest value refers to the fact that individual, not only an individual person but also individual community, wants to conserve these resources for their children, grandchildren in future. So this is the bequest value, the future value. It is based on the desire to make current sacrifices to raise the well-being of one of the descendants. So now there is this current situation where you have a certain amount of forest supply that will be sufficient for 30 years. There is a soil loss, amount of soil loss that is happening now, and then water availability that is available now, and the meals per week. So how many meals are per week contributed for the development of program by your household? And then you have improved situation. So if you have to improve your situations, what kind of measures you want to take? So for these situations and to reach these particular 60 years and 90 year scenario, what kind of sacrifices you can make to ensure that your future generations are having a good amount of these resources to enjoy even in future. So this is what is asked in contingent valuation, and is also part of uh, exercise by understanding what people are willing to accept and willing to uh, pay. But at the same time, we need to understand this willingness to pay and willingness to accept the entire approach is based on whatever the market rates are available for these specific requirements. Now, if you see again the preference method approach, there are three important approaches: revealed preference method, cost-based methods, and stated preference method. So the market revealed preference methods are of three types. One is market price method, because then you compare the cost. For example, if you are trying to understand the cost of a timber wood, or you're trying to understand the fuel wood cost, or you're trying to see how much of fodder is available. So these can be easily assessed by whatever is available in market. For example, we have good timber depot, we have state level depot, then we have a national pricing, state pricing, and international pricing of certain kind of wood. But at the same time, if a local person is harvesting these resources from the nearby forest area, he has his own price that he used to sell his produce that he has harvested from the forest to the nearby market. For example, if a certain person has caught fishes from nearby pond or wetland and marine area, the cost might be 10 rupee per fish in the market. In the local market, it can be 25 rupees in the national market, but maybe he can fetch more if he sells this in the international market. So that's a market price method. And the productivity approach. So in terms of productivity approach, for example, if there are more production of certain thing, we all know the cost decreases, the sale price decreases. If we have more production in the environment of a certain, for example, there is a certain kind of fruit that grows more in the environment, the cost reduces. So that's a productivity approach. But at the same time, if there is less resource in the environment, it is scarce in the environment and the ecosystem, the productivity approach leads to increasing the price of that particular ecosystem good, the direct use value or indirect use value. And then we have surrogate market approaches. The surrogate market approaches are like something that's not existing but that has a value. For example, the travel cost method. But again, the limitation of travel cost method is we are using travel cost approach more to assess the values of a certain spiritual or recreational benefit that comes from a protected area, that comes from visiting a wetland or an important area where people like to go for picnic. And the second surrogate market approach is hedonic pricing, the future pricing of this entire approach. I'll be discussing that also in my forthcoming slide. And then we have cost-based approaches, the replacement cost. For example, if there is this wood that doesn't have any cost in the market, but if I replace it with LPG, what will be the replacement cost? Or if I want to provide a substitute to fuel wood, it can be cow dung cakes or something else. So based on the substitute of services, the cost of substituted services, we can use a cost-based method approach. And then damage cost avoided. For example, if there is a good buffer in riparian areas or in coastal area, and there is a cyclone or there is a flash flood, the kind of damage it incurs on the nearby areas, in the coastal areas, if we have good healthy ecosystem, so the amount of damage avoided can be the cost of this important ecosystem. And there are stated preference method, there are contingent valuation, conjoint analysis, and choice experiment that I'll be sharing in my forthcoming slides. Now, the direct values are the market prices, as I mentioned in my previous slide. And these market prices are changing with time and scale. For example, at local level, the prices are different. At national and international level, the direct use values and the direct values of goods and products can be very different that are in the local market. And then indirect, the productivity and cost-based approach, effect on production, replacement, substitute, and cost of avoiding the damage. So I'm sure a little bit of these concepts are clear to you. And then the surrogate market prices. If we don't have productivity-based approaches, if we don't have market for certain things, what can be the surrogate market where we create a kind of market, create a kind of carbon for non the values that are not directly used. For example, watching a good mountain area, watching a mountain peak, or going to a tiger reserve. So they have a travel cost, and this again benefits how much people prefer to pay for visiting and enjoying these areas. Now, this can be also different for person, somebody who is not good in terms of, good in terms of earning livelihood. A middle class family might have a different surrogate market price for visiting a certain area than what a rich person, upper middle class or upper class person can have. So this has a different perception and different eye view of how person prefers to pay for enjoying these benefits. And taking the average value of all these different respondents, approximate value of a certain area can be given. Now, I have already provided some understanding on these methods. So we'll go for first market prices. For example, willingness to pay and willingness to accept. Willingness of a person to, for example, we did this. For example, we did this study for Kedarnath Wildlife Sanctuary. So this is not a representative picture, but I'm sharing our experience from Kedarnath Wildlife Sanctuary, where there was this village cluster where people were locally using a lot of resources in terms of fuel wood, fodder, a lot of wild edibles, litter for their livestock and for their agriculture. And these were the subsistence requirement of people that require from their nearby villages, from nearby forest areas. Now, this scenario is more or less common if you see different forests across the world. So, this example is from area in Cambodia, and we have similar stories. You go to northeast or western Himalayas or central India, where people get direct benefits from these communities. So when you have to use this market price approach, you have to actually ensure, for example, one thing is the cost of resource that they are harvesting, fuel, fodder, NTFP, etc. They can be also harvesting a lot of bush meat, timber for housing, and fuel wood for fuel, and then also a lot of leaf litter for their good farmyard manure to their agriculture. But it needs to understand that in collecting all these resources, a significant amount of human energy also goes. So we need to understand this total man days invested. So, for example, if the wage cost for one human being to invest 8 hours per day or 12 hours per day, according to wage laborers, is about 500 rupees or 800 rupees, we can also give some kind of value that how much of input is going and how much of output is coming. And then if they are selling these resources to a nearby market, how much of livelihood they are getting. So that kind of cash income, plant foods, wild meat, under the concept of willingness to pay and willingness to accept, through following a questionnaire survey, they can be assessed. And in that ways, the direct use values of a forest area can be assessed, like how many households are there, how much quantity is being harvested per day, then how much quantity might be harvested for entire week, entire month. So you need to have a comprehensive understanding of what is harvested from where, what is the requirement, what a single household harvest, how many households are involved, and then how much is the total quantity harvested by community or village for the entire 1 month, and then giving a market based price based on their willingness to accept or willingness to pay to these values and come up with a total value. So here is this forest area from Cambodia where they have assessed different values and come up with the market price total value of direct use values. Now, there is a limitation of this particular method of market price. The first thing is, for example, if primary resource is affected, what will be the commercial benefit or commercial market? For example, if I want to clean up a certain area where a spill of petrol or any fossil fuel has happened, and then commercial fishing or fisheries, so it's very tough to actually come up with the appropriate price of these I mean damages and the larger extraction of resources. The first thing is that these prices, quantities, and cost are very easy to obtain because you have a parallel market from where you can choose these prices. And the method is used based on observed data of actual preferences. For example, community likes to have a certain kind of wood. That means the pressure on certain kind of tree is more than any other second priority. Then second thing is people want to have a certain kind of fruit from the forest. For example, rhododendron, and they make juice, jam, and jellies to be sold in the market, but they don't use other fruits. So there is an actual preference. And then you have a standard economic approach to do that, consumer producer approach, and it is very relatively easy to apply because it works on willingness to pay and willingness to accept. So community and respondents can give you a certain value, even in terms of yes and no, how they want to actually have this kind of values for their direct benefits. But at the same time, as I mentioned, there is a seasonal variation, there is a spatio-temporal variation of these prices. So a certain price of certain local area cannot be taken as a representative for the entire bigger area. So once you work on a certain scale, so this limited scale is a representative of that particular area. And uh, and then usually the cost of transport to bring goods to market is not included. Of course, we are only talking about the market prices. We are not talking about other interlinked prices. For example, how much they will pay if they have to sell these particular good to the market. So these benefits and these costs are mostly overstated or understated. And these ecosystem services, many of these direct services don't have a proper market. So we use a comparable price, but that's not a true price of these commodities. Now, the second approach was productivity method. And this was the economic contribution of ecosystem to other production and consumption activities, and market value was used as an input. For example, flood attenuation benefit from forest. So, for example, this is a certain area, and damage results to a loss of paddy production in the area. So if damage happens, what will be the cost of these areas? And if there is no damage, what will be the cost of the paddy produced in these fields, and how much money it fetches in the market? So these kind of representative productivity methods are also important and can be easily taken care of. For example, if watershed protection benefits and a national park is established, how it ensures watershed protection and benefits because of protection by watershed is, it can be an important example to state here. So national park creation itself has a cost, and when you create a national park, it also leads to good watershed management practices. For example, restoration of degraded resources, in situ conservation. So this all leads to improved benefits to the communities who are living in the fringe areas. So this can be enhanced. The reduced disaster risk, reduced flood damage, enhanced carbon stock, good environment. So these all comes under the productivity method. Now, there are again advantages and limitations of productivity method. Uh, the methodology is very straightforward, where you have a certain damage happening, and you are replacing with if you have a certain approach that reduces this damage. So you use this aggregated or additional amount for under the productivity method. And then your data requirements are very limited. But if you see the contingent valuation, your data requirement is very high, and there is a lot of relevant data that is already available in secondary information. So this becomes an inexpensive approach to apply. Again, the limitation is that resources and services that are having market can only be valued under the productivity approach. And the most difficult part of this approach is that if you want to quantify the biophysical relationships that link the changes of supply and quality of ecosystem services with environmental changes or management. So these are mostly uh, simplified assumptions that are used in productivity method, whereas there is a lot more complexity that is, I mean, involved in this entire exercise, where you are avoiding a damage, uh, and how much more costs are involved with reducing the damage and reinstating or ensuring that ecosystems are healthy and providing appropriate ecosystem services. Now, another important area is if changes in ecosystem affects market price, then the method is more complicated and difficult to apply. For example, as I mentioned in one of my previous slides, if there is more availability of resources, or if there is a less availability of resources, for example, certain fruit production has been more in the forest, and or it has been less. So this leads to fluctuation in market prices. So once there is fluctuation in market prices, that means you cannot give one value that is fixed for over a party time period or over the season. So this fluctuation in value of ecosystem is a complicated and needs to be very carefully understood when we apply this approach. And if changes are too drastic, there are For example, if there is a regular flash flood that happens every year, or there is a certain kind of soil erosion, or there is a drought that happens every third year or fourth year. So this frequent changes might lead also like consumers to switch to other alternatives, and that has not been part of this productivity method. So this also gives a very incomplete picture of valuation that is assessed under the productivity method. Now, this is a important approach, and there are many studies, especially for protected areas of India, especially like I've read one approach on Kalakad Mundanthurai Tiger Reserve in South, where they have used travel cost approach. And some of you, if you are interested, you can look to a lot of these approaches that are used for assessing the value of protected areas or national parks under the travel cost method. So, but again, the limitation is it's mostly limited to recreational benefits or spiritual or aesthetic benefits. How much people spend to use or benefit from using ecosystems or recreational purpose. For example, I want to go to a certain area. My limitation can be that I can only afford or I can only will to afford a certain kind of resort or hotel or a homestay program. So based on the price, my value towards enjoying the benefits, enjoying the recreational and spiritual benefits of nature or national park will be very different. For example, somebody who pays more can go closer to the core zone area, will be exposed to more. I mean, singly he can with his family go and explore these aesthetics. Whereas if you see the kind of rush that we have in tiger tourism right now in the country, you see tens and twelves of these gypsies flocking to see one tiger. So that reduces the, I mean, it's definitely is a benefit, but at the same time, if you are the only person to enjoy that recreational benefit, the kind of cost you would like to pay might be more. And it also depends on different income groups, income classes of the society. So now this can improve environmental quality because, for example, this is how you go and board a plane where there is a first class, there is a economy class. So the one who are paying more and the taxes that come, the larger taxes that come from these customers are actually used for improving the environmental quality or to give the better luxury to these customers. So for example, this is one of the values that is projected for USA for freshwater recreation, that is about $37 billion per year. But there are similar such studies in India also. And if you are interested, I'll bring in the next presentation. So, as I mentioned, there are advantages and limitation, and uh, the biggest limitation of travel cost method of ecosystem valuation is limited to recreational values. It doesn't goes beyond that. It doesn't goes and tries to understand other inherent values and costs that are integrated with the ecosystem. It requires complex statistical analysis, large scale complex data sets, hence it is expensive and time consuming because you have to see how many people are coming every day, how many people, different classes of society, of different income classes are visiting, and they're adults or which background. So this makes this whole data set very complex and expensive and at the same time also time consuming. Uh, at the same time, it also uses estimates value of one factor because it's very difficult for economists to separate out effect of different factor. Some people might be interested to see a wetland, whereas some are interested in landscape beauty. So you cannot give a true value like which value is coming from water and which value is coming from landscape beauty. So there are certain limitations to travel cost method also. Now, the important area is replacement cost method. Cost method talks about replacing environmental good or service, a minimum estimate of money saved. For example, if I'm giving you a substitution of replacement, how you save certain amount of money and conserve that resource. For example, this is another example from the same national park in Cambodia, where if floods are avoided, erosion is avoided, storm is protected, and silt trapping is taking place, how much of environmental good or services cost will be? So basically, this amount comes from not actual valuation of ecosystem services, but it comes from the benefit of ecosystem services. So, for example, to protect the area from storms, we have about $60,000 used to conserve this area from storms. And to trap silt, you have some check dams or something. So you put an additional cost. So the total cost that is used to actually conserve this area, reduce flood risk, and reduce erosion, so that this additional cost is actually the cost of national park. So this is the additional and different approach of replacement cost. So we talked about market cost, we also talked about productivity cost, and now we are talking about replacement cost. Now, cost of mitigation of ecosystem degradation. So again, for example, even in NERI, what we did do this damage cost assessment, like how much of damage you have done. So, what if this urban and water supply in this particular watershed to mitigate erosion, seasonal low water supply, and flooding? So, this can actually work in creating and assessing the actual value of ecosystem, because these values are of protecting the ecosystem and at the same time are the values that ecosystem gives to us. Now, damage cost avoided is again, as I mentioned, these are different examples, how much of money you have saved. So, watershed management, check dams, having riparian buffers, coastal areas, and having good mangrove cover in coastal areas. If we can value the amount of damage it can reduce, it is the damage cost avoided, and it is the minimum estimated of money that can be saved. Now, advantage of cost-based method is that it's particularly useful for valuing ecosystem services. It's simple to apply and analyze. It relies on a lot of secondary data, because we know that if we are creating a certain kind of benefit in this particular ecosystem and area, we know that we have access to data about damage control because of flood risk, because of cyclone risk, because of erosion. So these values are already available, and easier to measure cost of producing benefit than the benefit themselves. It's easier to understand these values and project them as ecosystem values, whereas to assess the direct use values, to assess the productive values, you have seen in my previous slide, it's very, very data intensive, time intensive, and cost intensive approach. And at the same time, there are a lot of limitation to market approaches, to productivity approaches. And if time and financial resources for the study are limited, where you don't have access to contingent valuation method or productivity based method or travel cost method, you can actually opt for cost based methods. And this requires less data, it's less intensive, and it may give you a total value of a ecosystem in a very easy way. Then the larger limitation is, as you have seen in the previous slide, it's not the true value of ecosystem. It's basically only a rough indicator of ecosystem value. Then replacement cost is difficult to find perfect replacement. What if your replacement is not truly successful? It is not achieving the resilience quotient of conservation. It is not securing disaster in long term. Then your replacement cost method becomes not very successful. Mitigation approaches. We talk a lot about climate mitigation, and there are a lot of these mitigation and adaptation measures that experts share for the communities, but many times, as they are not tested for a very long time, these mitigation expenditures are also not very successful on ground, and they don't give true representation of mitigation expenditure. While if communities and their adaptation and mitigation approaches are funded and they are valued, they can bring you better insights to these expenditure measures, because they are tested and tried for a very longer time, and they are more successful with fluctuating environmental conditions. And then damage cost avoided. It's mostly a hypothetical criteria of understanding, and it is often very difficult to relate it with the damages that are happening in the environment. We only give a representative figure. It's not a true figure. So these are some of the limitation and advantages of cost-based methods. If we don't have time and money, and we don't have enough of expertise available to undertake these kind of studies. Now, contingent valuation has already been explained by me, and if you want, I can explain more in a very local study that we carried out. But the basic idea is involving communities and understanding what their willingness to pay or willingness to accept, and the amount people should pay under the theoretical condition that biodiversity can be bought and sold. So, advantages of contingent valuation is it's very flexible in nature. You can always put a price to nature and ask community how much they are willing to pay or how much they are willing to accept if they want to keep these resources intact and these ecosystem services intact for a very longer time, and they want to harness the benefits for a very longer time. And this is very widely accepted methodology. I must say you will find a lot of approaches that are based on contingent valuation method for total economic value assessment, because that includes non-use option and bequest values. And here I'm sharing one of the questionnaires you can have uh, open-ended questions from communities, and you can exercise this for a certain area. You can use it in natural ecosystem, you can use in urban ecosystem, and it has been a very largely widely used approach, and it's more viable, more reliable, because you are working with the community, you are collecting the comprehensive database, and at the same time it gives you a representative, that's more accurate value of ecosystem in terms of market and in terms of present times. So for example, you want to ask communities if they will have to enter inside a protected area, how much they would like to pay, collection of certain resources, and if you want to move inside a protected area, collection and foraging of medicinal plants, mushroom. So if they give you certain value, you can come up with the average value and give up appropriate value to these ecosystem services that are well contributed by a large number of respondents. Now, limitations are they're very controversial. People can put any number to the value to accept and sell. So there is no regulation on how much should be the value and how less or how more it can be. The results are very sensitive to how we are designing this survey, because this is more of a participatory survey that where you ask the communities, you go for focus group discussions. So it's a more socio-economic survey how you do, but at the same time it's highly governed by the psychological aspects, how connected and detached communities are with the local natural resources. And as I mentioned, it's a considered a sensitive payment machine that people want to compensate, and the strategic bias to influence outcome. There are chances that it can be biased how communities want to, mold this entire survey and come up with a certain kind of value. There are non-response bias also, and many people, including policymakers, economists, and others, do not believe the results of contingent valuation measure. The reason is they think that communities are very biased in their approaches and then their answer. So these are the major limitations of contingent valuation. And then less common methods are hedonic pricing, the conjoint analysis, and the choice experiment. Now I would like to define more in my forthcoming and the last few concluding slides what hedonic pricing, conjoint analysis, and choice experiments are. Now, going to this particular slide, for example, you are coming from the airport, and I see quite a lot number of these big boards where they endorse that this particular high rise is coming near to a wetland area, or there will be good sighting on flamingos, and there will be good greenery. So basically, this is a hedonic pricing method where they are showcasing you a certain good ambient environmental conditions. So this additional cost that you pay for a certain area is basically hedonic pricing. For example, I generalize this slide by saying that the accessibility, your house is a certain area, you're going to buy a house, and there are two options. At one place, it's 5 minutes very close to the highway, and it has a close distance to railway station and school, while the other location is about 20 minutes far from the railway station. In the similar case, I'm presenting this experience where I am having a house with good sighting of natural nature outside my house, good wetlands, some birds and animals. So this definitely attracts me to buy a house where there are more amicable and a good quality of life. So I'll definitely buy a house where my quality of life gets improved and my psychological and health benefits are assured. So the buyer always prefers to live at a location and it wants to pay more to get those benefits. So that's basically in general terms hedonic pricing. So the premium charged to location A term as the hedonic pricing valuation model. Now the second area is conjoint analysis. Conjoint analysis is where you have this option to actually explore this landscape from different kind of analysis that are available in the market. For example, when you go for buying a mobile phone or you want to buy a policy on a certain online site, it gives you a comparison, a conjoint choice task. So based on that, and you try to see all these choices and you try to select the best one out of it. So this best selection is basically a conjoint analysis, and this conjoint analysis is a less common method of even approaching and valuing the ecosystem. Now, hedonic pricing is something interesting we always see in our daily lives, and conjoint analysis is again a similar way to better understand it with the common approaches that we practice and use every month when we are buying certain important commodity and how we compare. Now, the choice experiment is another non familiar and less used approaches where you are given three approaches and at the same time you are to opt from these choice of experiment. So when your choices are given, your costs are also given at the end. Like if you have a choice of nature's gift, research and education, climate regulation, water regulation, sense of experience, important threatened and charismatic species. So based on our interest, like we want to choice for nature's gift or we don't want to choice. So based on our selection of criteria, we actually select an important category and accordingly we approach to the cost that is to be paid. So now this can also be achieved by having a questionnaire survey with the choice experiment respondents of the study. Now with this, I come to the end of my today's slide. I'm sure today was an exhaustive presentation, but I'll look forward to your question. And if you don't have question, you can ask me later on. And if you want to hear more